Hello and welcome to another video in this series which aims to cover the basic functionality in Fantasy Grounds Unity. And in this video, and probably in the next one as well, we're going to be looking at the campaign options, which are accessed through this little cog icon here. Now there's lots and lots of them. I'm not going to cover every one in detail, but we'll look at the main ones and the ones that I think are most useful for general play. So when you click on the options, you get this menu, and you can see that there are dozens of them. And they're divided into different categories. You can see per user, game, combat, token, and then house rules. And each of these options are sort of grouped roughly into that sort of category. Now this is obviously the GM view. If we have a look at the player view here, when we go into options, the player can only use or utilize these top four in the per user. They don't have any availability. None of the other options are available to players. So that's the first thing that we need to note. And the first one we'll look at is the dice manual entry. Now this is quite a useful thing. It's designed specifically for using Fantasy Grounds in face-to-face games, where you want to use the automation of Fantasy Grounds but still want to roll physical dice. The manual dice entry is off by default, but if we turn it on, then what that means is that any dice roll that is made either by the DM or a player will be intercepted by the manual dice entry, and you'll be able to specifically add in the dice roll that you want. So if we have the black bear here attacking fingers, when we drop the dice onto fingers, we get the manual dice entry dialog opens up, and we can type in whatever number we like into the targets box here, or in the D20 box here, and then just click OK. And you can see in chat that a 15 was rolled and it was a hit. Now you can also sort of ask the manual dice entry to just ignore that by clicking on the roll button, and it will just roll normally. So even with the manual dice entry on, you don't need to have to type in a number all the time. And this will intercept any kind of dice roll that's made either by by the DM in this case, and it'll intercept saving throws, attacks, damage, all sorts of things. Now the players also have this, because it's a per user, as we talked about earlier, the players can independently set the manual dice roll entry as well. So if we have set this to on in the player view here, and fingers then makes an attack against the black bear, such as that, and then he can put in whatever dice roll he fancies and click on OK. And oh, look, he's made a critical hit. Now, just in case DMs are worried about this, you'll see that in the chat here, it clearly suggests or tells you that the roll was manual. So if your players are trying to get one over on their DM, then they're out of luck, because the DM will be able to see that that was a manual dice roll. So manual dice roll is independent of the user, can be used by players or DMs, and will intercept most dice rolls. It won't intercept initiative rolls or rolls which are made on a story template, but pretty much every other roll that you could make, it will be intercepted, and you'll get the dice entry pop up. So let's get rid of this and set that back to the default, which is off. The next one I wanted to look at is this one here, set GM voice to active CT. Basically what this means, it's off by default, but if we switch it on, basically what this means is it will set the GM voice in chat to the active NPC that's on the combat tracker. So if we look down here at the moment, we've got the GM voice is set to GM, but when we get to the bronze dragon wormling here, it's set to that. And if we now type in some text, then the GM is talking through the bronze dragon wormling. So that's quite a useful one if you do storytelling campaigns, etc. The next two I want to look at are somewhat related. The show GM roles and show results to clients. And a show GM roles is off by default and show results to clients is on by default. So let's clear this up too so we can see this more clearly. So what this means is that the players are going to not see the GM roles because it's off, but they are going to see the results of the role. So if we have this bronze dragon make a roll against fingers, then the DM gets all this information about the bronze dragon attacking, and it's a bite, and what the dice roll is, and what the result of the roll is. If we look at the player screen, all that they see is that there was an attack, it was a bite, and it was a hit. They don't see the actual dice roll, and they don't see what it was that actually made the attack. If we switch on the GM dice rolls now and make the same attack again, then the players get a lot more information about that roll. We can see that it's basically the same information as the GM got. Bronze Dragon made the attack, there's the dice roll there, and we have the result of the dice roll. And if we then leave on the GM rolls but switch off the results and make the same attack again, then this time you can see that the attack has just been a bite and it's been an attack at fingers. We don't see we see the result of the roll, but we don't see what the actual result was in terms of whether it was a hit or a miss, etc. So you can play around with these two options and show more or less information to the players depending on which way you have those set. Now, one other brief thing is that I'm on the test channel at the moment and using version 4.3 of Fantasy Grounds. And if the show GM rolls is on in this version, when we make a dice roll, then the players actually see the dice roll from the GM. In the current version of Fantasy Grounds, that doesn't happen. The players only ever see shadow dice rolls. They don't see the actual dice, but that has changed now because of the extra dice which will be available with version 4.3. Moving on then, we showed you the show characters to clients and show inventory to players in the previous video, and we now can move down into the dice tower, which is off by default. So if we switch this on, then we'll see that down here the DM has suddenly got a little dice tower, and if we see in the player's view, then the players also have the little dice tower down on the bottom left of the screen. If we go back up to show GM roles and turn that off, then the DM dice tower disappears. This is because there's no need for the dice tower for the GM if the show GM rolls are off, because the dice rolls are off anyway. So if we switch over to the players then, since this is mainly aimed at players, the idea behind the dice tower is that the players can make secret rolls into the dice tower. So if the DM, for example, asks for a particular skill check, let's say a perception check, but he wants to put it into the dice tower, then the player just grabs the dice, drags it, and drops it into the dice tower. And you can see here that the player has showed that, or it shows in chat that the player has rolled a d20 with their proficiency bonus, but they don't see any result of that roll. If we switch back to the DM view, then it shows that the actual dice value that was rolled, and the DM can then determine using whatever a DC that our difficulty class that the DM has set as to whether the roll succeeds or fails, and then the DM can then give the player information. But the player will not know whether or not that information that has been gleaned from the roll was a success or otherwise, because they won't have information about the difficulty class, nor will they have any information about what the actual dice roll was. So that's the function of the dice roll, the dice tower. Is mainly for use for things like saving throws and for skill checks. It won't really work for attacks and damage rolls, etc. So let's move down to the combat section now. These first few here are concerned with how much detail the player characters see on the combat tracker. So these are the default values, and if we switch to the player view, we can see that the players see the initiative, they see the hit points of each individual character, their temporary hit points, if any, and their and their wounds. And for the NPCs, they again see the initiative, and they also see this bar here, which will vary depending on how wounded the creature is, but it doesn't give you the details of the actual hit points, etc. It just gives you this sort of descriptive message of how healthy or otherwise the NPC is. If we change this from the defaults, we can show that instead of showing the ally health as a status, as detailed, if we change that to status, then we see that the ally health becomes the same as the NPC's health. We can also we'll change that back to off, or we'll change it to off, and we can now see that the players have no information at all about what or how healthy each NPC or PC is. Set that back to detailed. If we show enemy health, it shows as a status. We can change that to off, and that means that the players will now no longer see any kind of detail about the wounds or otherwise of the NPCs. And we can also set that to detailed, and that means that the players will then get the full information about how many hit points the NPC has, how many wounds they have, and how many temporary hit points they have. So whatever you set these at, the DM has a whole variety of different things that they can set here, which will give the players more or less information about the wounds and the status of the NPCs on the combat tracker. None of these options change anything on the DM side of things. The DM always has the full details of the NPC and PC hit points, wounds, etc. So nothing that you change here will affect the DM screen or the DM's combat tracker at all. The next one to look at would be the NPC numbering. This is very useful. It's off by default, but if you have more than one NPC of the same type, then it's obviously useful to distinguish what they are. So if we add another couple of bronze dragon wyrmlings to the combat tracker here, you see that they're all just given the same name. There's nothing to distinguish between one and the other. But if we switch on the or switch this to append, then these NPCs will get a number. And I should have probably put that on before. There we go. Put another one on, and that updates it. And now we have Bronze Dragon Wyrmling 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that makes it easier to distinguish what the NPC or which NPC is which from the DM points of view. If we change this to where am I again? I've lost what here we go, NPC. We can also make it random. So when we add this blue dragon wormling now, the first one that has nothing because there's only one, but once we start adding more, you'll see that it gives it a random number. So in this way, the player characters don't know how many creatures they're facing. They might be able to see these two, and they'll see number 7 and number 10. They could think that there are 10 blue dragon wormlings somewhere on the map. So it's another way to obfuscate information that you give to your players one way or another. One more for this video and then we'll call it quits. We'll look at the player show turn order here, and it's set by default to all, and essentially this means that the players will see the initiative turn or the turns for the initiative that the for all the characters. So if we roll the initiative for the NPCs here, then basically the players will see the same screen. They will see the same order with Smasher at the top, Fingers at the bottom, and the two NPCs in the middle. But if we turn that to friendly, then what the players will see is they'll see the friendly NPCs, they see their turn, but they don't know what turn the NPCs fall on. So they could be at anywhere. And if we then select the next option, which is off altogether, then the players have no idea what the turn order is. So basically they won't see what the initiative is for any of their self or their allies or the NPCs. So again, another thing that you can do to make life more difficult, if you like, for the players, or to hide information from them that they might be able to use to metagame or whatever. Okay, I think that's probably enough for this video. We'll continue looking at some of the other options in another video. Thanks for watching. Cheers for now.